photograph that should not exist. Sometimes the strangest mysteries begin with something small. Not a loud noise in the middle of the night, not a dramatic event that instantly demands attention. Instead, they start quietly, almost invisibly, slipping into ordinary moments when nothing unusual is expected to happen. For Alex, the mystery began with a single photograph. It arrived late one evening while he was scrolling through his phone. A notification appeared from an unknown sender. No name, no message, just a file attached beneath the number. Curious, Alex opened it. The image looked old. The colors were slightly faded, the lighting soft and uneven, like the kind of photo taken years ago on an early digital camera. At first, nothing about it seemed particularly strange. It showed a small group of friends standing together in a living room. Some were sitting on a couch, others standing behind it. Everyone looked relaxed, smiling toward the camera. And one of them was Alex. For a moment, he simply stared at the screen, trying to place the memory. Then it came back to him. The photo had been taken about 10 years earlier. It was during a small gathering at a friend's apartment. Nothing special, just a casual night with music playing in the background, people talking, and someone deciding to take a picture before everyone left. Alex even remembered the room, the couch near the window, the lamp in the corner, the cluttered table filled with empty glasses. But as he looked closer at the photograph, something about it began to feel wrong. He started counting the people in the picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then he stopped. There were 7 people. Alex frowned. He clearly remembered who had been at that gathering, and there had only been 6 of them. Yet at the edge of the image, standing slightly behind the group, was another person. A man. He wasn't smiling like the others. He wasn't posing for the camera. He simply stood there quietly, looking toward the lens as if he had been observing the scene the entire time. At first, Alex assumed it was someone he had simply forgotten. After all, 10 years was a long time. Memories fade, details blur. But the longer he stared at the stranger's face, the more unsettling the realization became. Because Alex did recognize him. He hadn't seen the man 10 years ago. He had seen him last week. The memory surfaced slowly. Just a few days earlier, Alex had met the same man in a crowded cafe. They had been seated at neighboring tables, and the man had started a casual conversation while waiting for his coffee. It had been a completely normal interaction. Small talk about work, the weather, and how busy the city had become lately. After a few minutes, they had introduced themselves, exchanged a polite goodbye, and gone their separate ways. Nothing unusual, nothing memorable, except now that same man was standing inside a photograph taken 10 years before they had ever met. Alex checked the image again, zooming in carefully. The stranger's face was clear enough to remove any doubt. It was the same person. And suddenly, the photograph no longer felt like an old memory. It felt like evidence of something that shouldn't exist. The unexpected message. The photograph itself was strange enough, but what unsettled Alex even more was the way it had arrived. There had been no explanation, no context, not even a simple greeting. Just a message from an unfamiliar number and a single attached file. No words, no emojis, nothing that hinted at who had sent it or why. At first, Alex assumed it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe someone had typed the wrong number. Maybe the message was meant for someone else entirely. After all, it wasn't unusual for random files to appear on messaging apps from time to time. Still, something about this felt different. He opened the chat again and looked carefully at the sender's number. It wasn't saved in his contacts, and he didn't recognize it. The area code didn't immediately mean anything to him either. Alex hesitated for a moment before typing a reply. "Who is this?" He waited. The message was delivered almost instantly. A small checkmark appeared beneath the text, confirming that it had reached the other phone. But the screen remained silent. No typing indicator. No response. A minute passed. Then, too, Alex leaned back in his chair and glanced again at the photograph that had started all of this. The longer he looked at it, the more questions it seemed to raise. Why send an old picture like this? And why send it to him? He tried to think of anyone who might still have that photo saved somewhere. Maybe one of the friends from that night had found it while going through old files and decided to share it as a joke. But if that were the case, why send it anonymously? Alex opened the image again and studied it more carefully. The living room in the background looked exactly as he remembered. The old couch, the narrow window behind it, even the framed poster hanging slightly crooked on the wall. Everything seemed authentic. Nothing appeared edited or manipulated. If someone had altered the photo, they had done an incredibly convincing job. Alex zoomed in on the faces of the people in the picture, one by one. His friends looked exactly the same as he remembered them back then, slightly younger versions of themselves, caught in a frozen moment from another time. Then his eyes moved again to the stranger standing at the edge of the frame, the man who shouldn't have been there. A quiet unease settled in Alex's mind. He minimized the photo and returned to the message thread. Still nothing. The unknown sender had not replied. Alex tapped on the number, bringing up the contact information screen. There was no profile picture, no status message, just the blank default icon that most people never bother to change. For a moment, he considered calling the number directly, but something stopped him. Instead, he typed another message. "Why did you send me that photo?" He stared at the screen again, waiting for the familiar bubble that would indicate someone was typing on the other end, but it never appeared. Minutes passed, stretching longer than they should have. The silence from the other side of the conversation began to feel intentional, as if whoever had sent the image wanted Alex to look at it carefully, to notice something on his own. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Alex opened the photograph again. This time he looked at it differently, not just as a memory, not just as a strange coincidence, but as if it had been sent to him for a specific reason. His eyes drifted once more to the man standing in the background, the stranger who wasn't supposed to be there. And the more Alex looked at that face, the more certain he became of one unsettling thought. Whoever had sent the photograph already knew something Alex had only just begun to realize. A memory from 10 years ago. The longer Alex stared at the photograph, the more the past began to surface in his mind. Memories have a strange way of working. Most of the time, the details of ordinary days disappear quickly. Conversations fade, faces blur, entire evenings vanish into the background of time. But sometimes all it takes is a single image to bring everything rushing back, and that photograph was doing exactly that. Slowly, the moment began to rebuild itself in Alex's memory. It had been about 10 years earlier, during a time when life felt simpler. Everyone in the group had been younger then, still figuring out careers, relationships, and the direction their lives might eventually take. The gathering had taken place in Mark's apartment. Mark had always been the one who liked hosting small get-togethers. His place wasn't particularly large, but it had a comfortable, lived-in feeling that made people want to stay longer than they planned. Alex could almost picture it clearly now. The narrow hallway leading into the living room, the old gray couch pushed against the wall beneath the window, the floor lamp in the corner that cast a warm yellow light across the room. Music had been playing quietly from a speaker on the table. Nothing loud, just a background soundtrack for the endless conversations that filled the room that night. There had been 6 of them in total: Alex, Mark, Daniel, Sophie, Lena, and Chris. They had all known each other for years by that point. Some had met in college, others through work, but over time they had become the kind of group that could meet after months apart and continue talking as if no time had passed at all. The night itself hadn't been particularly important. No birthdays, no celebrations. Just one of those spontaneous evenings when someone suggested meeting up and everyone agreed. They had ordered food, opened a few drinks, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. Chris had told a long, ridiculous story about getting lost during a road trip. Lena had complained about her new job. Sophie had been laughing so hard at one point that she nearly spilled her drink across the table. Alex remembered sitting near the arm of the couch, listening to the conversation while occasionally glancing toward the window where the city lights glowed faintly outside. It had been the kind of evening that felt ordinary while it was happening, but looking back now, it carried the quiet warmth of a memory frozen in time. At some point during the night, Someone had suggested taking a photo. Alex couldn't remember exactly who. Maybe it had been Mark. He was always the one who liked documenting moments like that. Everyone had gathered together in the living room. Some sat on the couch, others stood behind it. Someone held up a phone, or maybe it had been an early digital camera. The technology back then had been different, but the result was the same, a quick snapshot to remember the night. Alex even remembered the exact moment before the photo was taken. Chris had made another joke, something about how they would all look back at the picture in 10 years and realize how young they had been. Everyone laughed. Then the camera clicked. For years after that night, Alex had barely thought about the photo again. It had probably been shared in a group chat at the time, maybe even posted somewhere online before disappearing into the endless archives of old digital memories. Life had moved on. People had moved away. Jobs had changed. The group didn't meet as often anymore. Some friendships slowly faded into occasional messages or brief updates on social media. That was simply how time worked. And yet, now the photograph had returned, after 10 years of silence. But this time, something about it was wrong. Alex looked again at the image on his phone. He studied each face carefully. Mark leaning casually against the couch, Sophie smiling toward the camera, Daniel raising his hand in a half wave. Everything looked exactly as it should, exactly as Alex remembered, until his eyes drifted once again toward the edge of the picture. The seventh person, the man standing slightly behind the others. Alex searched his memory desperately, trying to recall if anyone else had been present that night. Had someone arrived late? Had a friend of a friend stopped by briefly? Had there been a moment he simply forgot? But no matter how hard he tried, the memory refused to change. There had only been 6 people in that apartment, 6 voices, 6 conversations, 6 friends, and yet the photograph clearly showed 7. Alex stared at the stranger's face again. Something about the man's expression felt oddly calm, almost detached from the moment captured in the image. He wasn't laughing like the others. He wasn't leaning toward anyone in the group. He simply stood there, watching the camera, watching the moment being recorded, as if he had always known the photograph would matter one day. And that was when Alex felt a quiet, creeping realization begin to form. Because the problem wasn't just that there was a stranger in the picture. The real problem was that Alex knew exactly who that stranger was. And he was absolutely certain of one thing. 10 years ago, when that photograph had been taken, they had never met. The stranger in the photo. At first, Alex tried to convince himself it was just a mistake. Memories can be unreliable. After 10 years, it wasn't unreasonable to forget small details. Faces disappear from memory, especially when they belong to people you only met once. Maybe the man in the background had simply been a friend of someone else that night. Maybe he had arrived late. Maybe Alex had spoken to him briefly and forgotten completely. Those explanations made sense. At least, they should have. But the longer Alex stared at the photograph, the harder it became to accept that idea. The man in the background didn't look like someone who had casually joined the group. He stood slightly apart from everyone else, positioned just behind the couch where the others were gathered. His posture was relaxed, but there was something unusual about the way he appeared in the frame. He wasn't interacting with anyone. He wasn't leaning toward the group. He simply stood there, looking directly at the camera, watching. Alex zoomed in on the image again. The quality of the photo wasn't perfect. It had clearly been taken with an older camera, but the man's face was still visible enough to make out the details. Dark hair, sharp features, a calm, almost unreadable expression. And the more Alex studied that face, the stronger the feeling became. He had seen this person before, recently, not years ago, not sometime in the distant past, just days earlier. At first, the memory felt distant, like something buried under layers of other everyday experiences. But slowly, piece by piece, the moment returned to him. It had happened at a cafe, a small place near the center of the city that Alex sometimes visited during lunch breaks. It wasn't particularly fancy, but it was quiet enough to work or read without too much distraction. That afternoon had been like any other. Alex had ordered coffee and taken a seat near the window. He remembered opening his laptop, responding to a few emails, and occasionally glancing outside at the slow movement of people walking along the street. The cafe had been moderately busy. A few people sat alone with laptops. Two students were discussing something over notebooks, and at the table beside him, someone else had been waiting for their drink. That someone had been the man from the photograph. At the time, Alex hadn't noticed anything unusual about him. The man looked completely ordinary, someone you might pass on the street without remembering a moment later. But after a few minutes, the man had turned slightly toward him and made a casual comment, something simple about how crowded the place had become. Alex had responded politely. A short conversation followed. Nothing personal. Just the kind of small talk that sometimes happens between strangers sharing the same space. They talked briefly about work, about how difficult it was to find quiet cafes lately, and about the unpredictable weather that week. At one point, the man introduced himself. "Ethan," he had said, offering a quick smile. Alex had done the same. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. Eventually, the man's coffee arrived, and shortly after that, he stood up to leave. Before walking out, he gave a small nod toward Alex, the silent acknowledgement of a conversation that had ended naturally. That was it. Or at least, that was what Alex had believed until now, because the face in the photograph was unmistakable. It was Ethan, the same man he had spoken to in the cafe just a week ago. Alex leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen with growing unease. That shouldn't have been possible. Even if Ethan had somehow been connected to someone at that gathering 10 years earlier, Alex would have remembered him. A face like that, someone who had stood directly behind the group during a photograph, would have been impossible to forget completely. But there was something even stranger about the image, something Alex hadn't fully noticed before. He zoomed in further, focusing on Ethan's expression. Unlike everyone else in the photo, Ethan wasn't reacting to the moment. The others were clearly caught in the middle of laughter and conversation. Their body language showed the relaxed energy of friends enjoying an ordinary night together. But Ethan looked different. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't distracted. His gaze seemed unusually focused, not on the people around him, on the camera, on the exact moment the photograph was taken. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. It almost looked as if Ethan had been aware of the camera before the others, as if he had been waiting for the picture to be taken. Another thought slowly formed in Alex's mind, one that made the entire situation even more disturbing. If Ethan had truly been present that night 10 years ago, why had he acted like a complete stranger when they met at the cafe? Why hadn't he said anything? Why hadn't he mentioned the photograph? Alex looked at the image again, trying to examine every small detail. The lighting, the shadows, the positions of everyone in the room. Everything looked authentic. There were no signs of editing or manipulation, no unnatural distortions, no digital artifacts that might suggest the image had been altered. If the photograph had been changed, whoever did it had done so perfectly. But deep down, Alex knew that wasn't the explanation, because the most unsettling part wasn't the photograph itself. It was the memory of Ethan sitting across from him in the cafe, speaking casually about nothing in particular. The calm expression, the normal conversation, the polite goodbye. And now, looking back on that moment, Alex realized something he hadn't noticed at the time. When Ethan had stood up to leave, he had looked at Alex for a second longer than necessary. Not like someone ending a conversation, but like someone quietly confirming something. As if he had already known who Alex was, long before Alex recognized him in the photograph. The meeting from last week. The more Alex stared at the photograph, the clearer the memory of the cafe became. At first, it had seemed like such an ordinary moment that it barely deserved attention. Just another brief interaction between strangers in a busy city. The kind of encounter that happens every day and disappears from memory almost immediately. But now, with the photograph glowing on the screen in front of him, that meeting no longer felt ordinary. It felt important. 7 days earlier, Alex had stopped by the same cafe he often visited during the afternoon. It was a quiet place tucked between two office buildings, popular with freelancers and students who needed somewhere calm to work. The atmosphere was always the same. Soft music playing in the background, the faint sound of cups being placed on tables, the quiet rhythm of conversations blending into a low murmur. Alex liked sitting near the window where he could watch people walking past outside while he worked. That afternoon, he had ordered his usual coffee and taken a seat at a small table near the glass. His laptop was open, and he was halfway through answering a series of emails when someone sat down at the table beside him. He hadn't paid much attention at first. The cafe was busy enough that strangers often ended up sitting close together. It wasn't unusual. But after a few minutes, the man at the next table spoke. "Busy day?" the stranger asked casually. Alex looked up. The man seemed friendly enough, mid-30s, maybe slightly older. Dark hair, neatly styled, calm eyes. The kind of face that didn't immediately stand out but still held your attention for reasons that were difficult to explain. Alex gave a small shrug. "Something like that," he replied. The man smiled lightly and gestured toward the laptop. "Work never really stops anymore, does it?" The conversation continued from there. At first, it was nothing more than polite small talk. They talked about how difficult it had become to find quiet places in the city, about how most cafes had turned into crowded workspaces, and about how people now seemed to carry their offices with them everywhere. The man introduced himself as Ethan. Alex did the same. Ethan spoke calmly, choosing his words carefully, but naturally, as if he was used to conversations like this. There was nothing strange about his tone or behavior. If anything, he seemed unusually relaxed. At one point, Ethan glanced briefly out the window. "Do you ever feel like this city changes faster than we notice?" he asked. Alex laughed softly. "Every week," he said. "Half the places I used to visit are gone." Ethan nodded, as if he understood something deeper behind the comment. "Places disappear," he said quietly. "But moments stay longer than we expect." At the time, the sentence had sounded like nothing more than an abstract observation. One of those slightly philosophical comments people make during casual conversations. Alex hadn't thought much about it. Now, remembering it again, the words felt strangely deliberate. Their conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. Just enough time for the barista to bring Ethan's coffee and for the two of them to finish discussing the usual topics strangers talk about when they know the interaction will soon end. Work, the city, the unpredictable weather. Nothing personal, nothing important. Or at least, that was how it had seemed. But as Alex replayed the memory, he began noticing details that had felt insignificant at the time. For example, Ethan had asked an unusual question near the end of their conversation. "Do you keep old photographs?" he had asked suddenly. Alex had frowned slightly. "Photographs?" "From years ago," Ethan clarified. "Old gatherings, friends, moments like that." Alex had shrugged. "Somewhere, probably," he said. "Most of them are buried in old folders or social media accounts I don't even check anymore." Ethan had smiled faintly at that answer. "Funny how we forget things that once seemed important," he said. Then he lifted his coffee cup and took a slow sip. Alex remembered thinking that the conversation had taken an unexpectedly reflective turn, but it still hadn't seemed strange enough to question. Strangers sometimes say odd things. That's just part of talking to people you don't know well. Eventually, Ethan placed the empty cup back onto the table and stood up. "Well," he said, adjusting his jacket slightly, "I should probably get going." Alex nodded politely. "Nice meeting you." "You too." Ethan hesitated for a brief moment as if considering whether to say something else. Then he gave a small nod. "Take care, Alex." The detail that bothered Alex now was simple but impossible to ignore. Ethan had said his name naturally, not as if he had just learned it minutes earlier, but as if he had already known it. At the time, Alex had barely noticed. People remember names during conversations all the time. There had been nothing obviously unusual about it. But when Ethan turned to leave, something else had happened. Just before reaching the door, he paused, not long enough to draw attention. Just a second. He turned his head slightly and looked back toward Alex. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Ethan smiled. Not the polite smile of someone ending a conversation, something quieter, more knowing. As if he had just confirmed something he had been uncertain about before walking into the cafe. Then he left. Alex hadn't thought about that moment again. Not until now. Not until he saw Ethan standing in the background of a photograph taken 10 years earlier. Suddenly, the meeting from last week no longer felt like a coincidence. It felt like the continuation of something that had started long before Alex realized it existed. Because now one question refused to leave his mind. When Ethan sat down beside him in that cafe, had it really been an accidental conversation? Or had he already known exactly who Alex was the entire time? Searching for answers. Alex sat motionless for a long moment, the photograph still open on his phone. The room around him had grown completely quiet. Outside his window, the city continued moving through its usual routines, cars passing, distant voices drifting through the evening air. But inside the apartment, everything felt strangely still. His attention remained fixed on the image. The more he looked at it, the more unreal it seemed. 10 years ago, that was what his memory told him. And yet the man standing in the background, Ethan, was someone Alex had only met a week earlier. It didn't make sense. There had to be a logical explanation. Alex leaned forward and began examining the photograph more carefully. The first thing he checked was the file information. Most images carried hidden metadata, details stored within the file itself that recorded when the photo had been taken, what device captured it, and sometimes even the location. He tapped on the image settings and opened the information panel. A list of technical details appeared on the screen. Date created, device model, file size. Alex's eyes moved quickly to the timestamp. For a moment, he simply stared at it. The date matched exactly what he remembered. 10 years earlier, the same month. Even the time of night looked right. His stomach tightened slightly. If someone had manipulated the photograph, they would also have needed to alter the metadata. That wasn't impossible. There were plenty of editing tools capable of doing that. But it required effort and technical knowledge. Which raised another question. Why would someone go to so much trouble just to send him a fake picture? Alex zoomed in again on the image. He focused on the lighting inside the room. The lamp in the corner cast a soft glow that matched the direction of the shadows across the floor. The reflections on the glass table looked natural. The slight blur around the edges of the frame was exactly what you would expect from a quick photo taken in a dim room. Everything looked authentic. There were no obvious signs of digital editing, no unnatural outlines around Ethan's figure, no mismatched lighting. If someone had inserted him into the image later, they had done it flawlessly. But even that explanation felt unlikely. Alex had seen edited photos before. Even the best ones usually left small imperfections behind, tiny clues that something had been changed. This photograph didn't have any. He zoomed further into Ethan's face. The grain of the image became more visible, but the details were still clear enough to recognize him without doubt. It was the same man from the cafe, the same calm eyes, the same faintly serious expression. Alex leaned back slowly, running a hand through his hair as he tried to organize his thoughts. There were only a few possibilities. The first was that the photograph had somehow been altered. The second was that his memory of the gathering 10 years ago was incomplete. Maybe Ethan had really been there, and Alex had simply forgotten. But the more he thought about that night, the less believable that idea became. The apartment hadn't been crowded. There had only been 6 people, 6 conversations, 6 voices filling the room. Alex could remember exactly where everyone had been standing when the photo was taken. There had never been a 7th person. And yet there he was, standing quietly behind them all. Alex lowered his eyes back to the phone. Then he noticed something else. The message that had delivered the photograph was still open on the screen. He scrolled up slightly, looking again at the top of the conversation. The unknown number, no name, no profile picture. Just the blank default icon most messaging apps assign automatically. But beneath the image file was something he hadn't paid much attention to before. A phone number. Alex stared at it. If someone had gone through the effort of sending the photograph anonymously, why include a number at all? Why not simply send the image and disappear? Unless, the thought formed slowly, unless the sender expected him to call. Alex tapped on the number and opened the contact page. The digits looked unfamiliar, but there was something oddly deliberate about the way the message had been sent. almost like a test, almost like someone waiting for him to notice something. He returned to the photograph one more time. His eyes drifted again to Ethan's position in the background, standing there, watching the camera, watching the moment unfold. Alex suddenly realized something else that made the situation even stranger. If Ethan had truly been present at Gagarin 10 years ago, then he must have known Alex long before they met in the cafe, which meant their conversation last week hadn't been between strangers. It had been between two people who had already shared a moment in the past. Only one of them remembered it. Alex looked down again at the phone number beneath the message. For a long moment, he hesitated. His mind kept searching for another explanation, something ordinary that could dissolve the strange tension building in his chest. But every possibility led back to the same unsettling conclusion. The only way to understand what was happening was to speak to the person connected to that photograph. Slowly, Alex pressed the call button. The phone lifted to his ear as the screen displayed a single word: dialing. The phone called. The phone rang once, then twice. Alex held the device against his ear, suddenly aware of how quiet his apartment had become. Even the faint sounds from the street outside seemed distant now, as if the entire world had stepped back to make room for this moment. By the third ring, he began to wonder if no one would answer. Maybe the number was inactive. Maybe whoever had sent the photograph never intended to speak with him at all. Then, just as the call was about to end, the line clicked. Someone picked up. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Alex could hear the faint sound of breathing on the other end of the line. Calm, steady, as if the person answering had expected the call. Finally, a voice broke the silence. Hello? The moment Alex heard it, a chill ran through him. He recognized the voice instantly. It was the same voice he had heard in the cafe a week earlier. Ethan. Alex swallowed, suddenly unsure how to begin. For a second, he considered hanging up, pretending the call had been a mistake, pretending none of this had happened. But the photograph was still open on his phone screen, the image of Ethan standing in the background of a room 10 years in the past. There was no turning away from it now. Ethan? Alex said cautiously. A brief pause followed. Then the man answered, Yes. The calmness in his voice made Alex's grip tighten slightly around the phone. It's Alex, he continued. We met last week at the cafe. Another short silence, but this one felt different. Not confusion, recognition. I remember, Ethan said. His tone was neutral, almost thoughtful. Alex hesitated, trying to decide how direct he should be. There was no easy way to ask the question forming in his mind. Finally, he said it. Did you send me a photograph? The silence that followed lasted longer this time. Not awkward, not surprised, deliberate. Alex could almost imagine Ethan standing somewhere quietly, considering how to respond. Then the man spoke again. I was wondering when you would call. The words made Alex's chest tighten. What do you mean? He asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question of his own. You saw it, didn't you? Alex glanced again at the photograph glowing on his screen. Yes. Another pause. And you recognized me. It wasn't phrased as a question, more like a simple observation. Yes, Alex said slowly. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint hum of the phone connection between them. Then Alex asked the question that had been building in his mind since the moment he opened the image. How are you in that photo? Ethan exhaled softly. Not the sound of someone surprised. The sound of someone who had already spent time thinking about the same problem. That's what I was hoping you could tell me, he replied. Alex frowned. What? I didn't send you the photo, Ethan continued calmly. The words landed heavily. Alex felt a wave of confusion rush through him. Then why does the message come from your number? Another quiet pause. I've been trying to figure that out too, Ethan said. Alex stood up slowly from his chair, pacing a few steps across the room. None of this made sense. If you didn't send it, he said carefully, then how did I get it? On the other end of the line, Ethan's voice lowered slightly. I've been looking for that photograph, he said. Alex stopped moving. What? For years, Ethan continued. The calmness in his voice hadn't disappeared, but now there was something else beneath it, relief. Because it proves something happened, Ethan said. Alex stared at the image again. What do you mean? Another silence. Then Ethan spoke the sentence that made the situation even more disturbing. The photo from 10 years ago, he said slowly. The one where we're both standing in the same room. Alex felt a cold sensation spread through his chest. Yes. Ethan's voice dropped almost to a whisper. I've seen it before, he said, but every version I found was missing something. Alex's eyes moved across the photograph again. The couch, the lamp, his friends, and Ethan standing behind them. Missing what? Alex asked quietly. On the other end of the call, Ethan gave a soft, uneasy breath. Missing you. The twist. For several seconds after Ethan's last words, Alex didn't respond. The sentence echoed in his mind, repeating itself in a slow, unsettling loop. Every version I found was missing you. Alex looked down again at the photograph on his screen. The image hadn't changed. The same 6 friends, the same living room, the same warm yellow light from the lamp in the corner, and Ethan standing quietly behind them. But now the picture felt completely different. Because according to Ethan, this version of the photograph shouldn't exist either. Alex forced himself to speak. What do you mean it was missing me? Ethan didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a quiet tension that hadn't been there before. For years, he said slowly, I've been trying to track down that photo. Alex frowned. Why? Another brief silence passed through the phone line. Because it's the only proof that something happened, Ethan said. Alex felt a tight knot forming in his chest. What happened? Ethan exhaled softly. The night that picture was taken, he said. I remember being there. Alex's eyes moved across the faces in the image again. Mark, Sophie, Daniel, Lena, Chris, himself. Then Ethan. But you weren't, Alex said carefully. At least not that I remember. I know, Ethan replied quietly. That answer made Alex pause. What do you mean, you know? Because when I found the photo the first time, Ethan said, everyone else was there. Alex's grip tightened around the phone. But you weren't. Alex felt a cold wave pass through him. What? In the version I saw, Ethan continued, there were 6 people in the room. Alex slowly sat back down. 6, the same number he had always remembered. And you're sure about that? Alex asked. Yes. Ethan's voice was calm again, but now it carried a deeper weight. In that photo, he said, I was standing behind the couch. Alex looked down again at the image, exactly where Ethan was now. But you're telling me, Alex said slowly, that in your version, I wasn't there? That's right. The room around Alex suddenly felt colder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 2 people, connected by a photograph that seemed to change depending on who was looking for it. Alex tried to make sense of the impossible situation forming in front of him. So let me get this straight, he said. In the picture you found, I didn't exist in that moment. And in the picture I received, he looked again at the screen, you're the one who shouldn't be there. Ethan gave a quiet, almost humorless laugh. Yes. The word hung in the air between them. Then Ethan said something that made the situation even stranger. That's why I've been searching for the original photo. Alex frowned. The original? Yes. The one that shows what really happened that night. Alex felt a strange sense of dread rising in his chest. What do you mean? For a few seconds, Ethan didn't respond. When he finally spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, more serious. Because if the photo keeps changing, he said slowly, then it means something else might be changing too. Alex stared at the image in silence. What? Ethan took a slow breath. Memory, he said. The words settled heavily in Alex's mind, and suddenly, the photograph on his screen no longer felt like an old picture. It felt like a record of a moment that reality itself couldn't decide how to remember. The final question. After the call ended, Alex remained sitting in silence. The screen of his phone slowly dimmed in his hand, but he didn't move to wake it again. His thoughts were still tangled in the strange conversation he had just had with Ethan. 2 versions of the same photograph, 2 different memories of the same night. In one version, Ethan didn't exist. In the other, Alex was the one missing. Neither explanation made sense, and yet the photograph remained. Eventually, Alex unlocked his phone again and opened the image. The familiar room appeared once more on the screen. the couch beneath the window, the lamp casting warm light across the walls. His friends gathered together, smiling toward the camera as if the night had been nothing more than a simple memory. He began counting the people in the photo again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The number hadn't changed. Ethan was still standing behind the group, exactly where Alex had first noticed him, watching the camera, watching the moment. Alex zoomed in slowly, studying every small detail of the image. The shadows looked natural. The expressions on everyone's faces were frozen in mid-laughter. Nothing about the scene suggested that anything unusual had happened that night. But now Alex knew that wasn't true, because somewhere, somehow, there existed another version of this same moment. One where the people in the room were slightly different, one where reality had arranged the memory in another way. Alex lowered the phone slightly and leaned back in his chair. His mind replayed Ethan's final words. If the photo keeps changing, then something else might be changing too. Memory. The idea lingered in Alex's thoughts. Memories shape the past. They determine how we understand what has already happened. But what if memory itself wasn't stable? What if certain moments in time could shift depending on who was remembering them? Alex lifted the phone again and looked at the photograph one more time. Then he noticed something that made him freeze. Near the bottom corner of the image, partially hidden in shadow, there was a faint reflection in the glass table in front of the couch. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than the blur of the camera. But the longer Alex stared at it, the clearer the shape became. It looked like the outline of a person, someone standing behind the camera, the one who had taken the photograph. Alex felt a slow chill spread through his chest, because if the photo could change who was standing inside the room, then one final question remained. If the people in the picture weren't always the same, who was holding the camera the first time the photo was taken? And more importantly, was that person still outside the frame? Or had they been quietly added to the picture already?
Shadows crawl